Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Prevention Matters panel session. Prevention Matters is a monthly online panel that's hosted by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, where we dive into what it means to prevent homelessness in our various communities. Most of us know that prevention is necessary if we want to solve the current housing crisis, but this series exists because if we want to address homelessness through prevention, then we must be clear on what prevention means. So, what can we do to reduce the chances that someone will experience homelessness in the first place? What can be done to support people who are at high risk of homelessness or who have recently become homeless? And how can we ensure that people who have experienced homelessness and who are now housed don't face housing precarity again? To delve into these questions, Prevention Matters invites brilliant minds to tell us about how prevention looks in their work, along with the lessons they've learned along the way. For today's conversation and is also joining us as an elder, will be opening and closing us with ceremony for today's conversation. So I will be handing over to her before we get into the rest of our script here. So over to you, Marie.
Annie, bonjour, Wachier. Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat, there's the cast. Doganing, Donjaba, Dogan Kwendao, Mampi Manado Manasing. Greetings, everyone. My name is Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat. I'm a Dogan Kwe, which means South Bay woman, from Doganing, which is in English means South Bay. On Wequenpong unceded territory, the eastern peninsula of Manitoulin Island in northeastern Ontario. And I wanted to offer a little prayer on behalf of all of the work we're trying to do today. Bonjour, Kajemiado, bonjour, Mishamsanan, Misnan. Jimmy Wedge, Dishman Pinish Nabeake, Mingo, Mino de Mardis. Jimmy Wedge, Ginagego, Giminagome, Luisniangi, Mijian, Inokian, Ginakaznan. And in English, it means greetings, Creator, grandmothers, grandfathers. Thank you for this beautiful land, Mishnabeake. And where we live, we all try to live in a good way. Thank you for the food that you've given us to eat in order to do the work that you have given us to do. And we say thank you. So it's miigwech, 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 miigwech. Nahaudish, we're ready to proceed.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Marie. So, getting to the rest of our introduction here. Like I mentioned before, we're joining today from a prevention series that's hosted by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness called Prevention Matters. And the idea is to invite people who've been doing this work in the sector to have conversations about what it's looked like to advance homelessness prevention in their work. So today's conversation, titled Rebuilding Home with Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit, and Gender Diverse Peoples, is the 8th in our series. If you're new here and maybe this is the first time that you're joining our conversation, I would highly recommend checking out some of our previous episodes after this conversation, because in my obviously completely unbiased opinion, as the person who produces the series, they are really great and they provide a lot of helpful context for the conversations to come. To commemorate Women's History Month, this month's panel will be focused on the work of the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and Keepers of the Circle, and we'll be talking about a project of theirs entitled Alternative Builds, which is empowering Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse peoples to design and build housing on their terms. As we've touched on in previous episodes, Indigenous homelessness is defined by much more than whether a person has a roof over their head. To quote what Kathy shared in her panel during episode 6, Indigenous homelessness is a very complex issue that has deep historical, structural, social, spiritual, cultural, and physical components, among other things. Because of this complexity, it can be hard for many of us to then understand what Indigenous homelessness prevention could look like if we try to think practically about it. It is true that no issue with multiple overlapping causes will ever be solved by one thing. And so the next question then becomes, what is out there that contributes to being a part of the solution? Today's conversation will highlight one piece of the puzzle through the Alternative Builds project. Kim Kakakaway, who is an Indigenous training and relations consultant with our partners Away Home Canada, will have a conversation with our panelists to explore how this project is helping individuals find home through cultural reconnection, as well as the design and construction of housing that is grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. Before we get into it, I wanted to remind you that these sessions are not your typical webinar. Your participation is a key part of this experience, so we strongly encourage you to engage among yourselves in the chat and ask any and all questions you might have during our open Q&A in the second half. I also wanted to remind you that your feedback is very important to us. And so if you have any thoughts on how we could improve your experience, or if you just want to send us some words of support, please take a moment to make use of our feedback form in the chat because we really do want to hear from you. The session will be recorded and shared publicly on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to maintain your privacy, I'll invite you now to turn off your video and rename yourself using the tools at the bottom of the screen. It is important to pay respect to the traditional guardians of the land which many of us are calling in from today. The Canadian Observatory on Homelessness recognizes the long-standing and ongoing relationship that Indigenous peoples have with Turtle Island, which includes both ceded and traditional land, and also includes the land known as Canada. Thanks again to Marie for opening us up with a ceremony that highlights this. We wanted to take a moment to encourage you to learn something new about the history of the land where you reside today. Emma will be sharing a resource in the chat where you can look up a particular city, county, or even an entire province and learn about the territories, languages, and treaties of that land. If you are watching the session back as a recording, this resource will be linked in the description or somewhere on the webpage, and so I still invite you to check it out and learn something new. The Canadian Observatory on Homelessness is based in York University, Toronto, so I'll be sharing their land acknowledgement. However, as always, we invite all of our guests to consider their position regarding the land in which they find themselves. So we acknowledge our presence on the territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So without further ado, I'll be handing over today's conversation to Marie and Colleen, who are going to start us off by telling us a little bit about the origins of the Alternative Builds Project and its impact so far from a more personal perspective. Marie and Colleen, feel free to introduce yourselves and take it away to the both of you and to Arlene and Trinity, who will be joining us a little later in this conversation. We look forward to learning from you today. The floor is yours.
Alrighty. Pauline, if it's okay with you, I can start it off and then I'll say, okay, over to Colleen. Hello, my name is Marie McGregor Pitawanakwat, as stated earlier. I serve as chair of the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and co-chair to the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. I also serve as coordinator to a group called the Secure Indigenous Land Tenure Association, or SILTA. And the reason it came to be was because I realized that we could not talk housing without also talking about land, but I can come back to that later. And in particular, I want to focus on a project we have underway now called the Alternative Builds Project. And Trinity Fletcher, who is our lead for research and community engagement, is also very much involved with alternative builds. And if I'm missing something, I'd like to ask Trinity to jump in later with the missing pieces. How it came to be was during the pandemic was we heard on the news that building materials were doubling in price. Then a few months later, we were hearing that they were tripling in price. Then the next thing we heard was that building materials were quadrupling in price. And then finally, a couple months after that, we were hearing that there were supply chain disruptions, which meant that even if you had the quadruple amount of money to pay for the building materials, you couldn't get them anyway because they were stuck at ports. And so I was thinking, well, what did we used to do long before home hardware and like building supply companies and so on like that. And I looked down on the ground and I thought, that's what we used to do. We used the earth itself. And so that got me to thinking about rammed earth and plasters and different types of buildings that you could put together using earth. For example, there was a recent project on Manitoulin Island. It's a hempcrete build. And then the southwestern peoples in the United States, indigenous peoples, used adobe. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, here we are on Manitoulin, and we're in the midst of the Niagara Escarpment, and what's all around us but rock, limestone and sandstone and all kinds of sedimentary type rock. And then nearby on the way to the mainland is where the transition zone is from uh, escarpment, sedimentary type rock to the igneous and granite and so on. And so people used to use stone. And then, of course, all around us are the forests. So then that leads to, okay, the homes can be built from logs, from timber frame, and from cordwood stackwood. And then got talking about it, and next thing you know, one of the team members from Keepers of the Circle, who really supports NIN, National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, sent in a grant application. And then next thing you know, we had funding for this project called Alternative Builds. And it's to examine each of those, in this case, the 5 materials: log, stone, timber frame, cordwood, stackwood, and straw bale, to see if there's community interest in Indigenous communities with using any of these materials, to ask them what does home mean to them, and also to ask, can you see yourselves using these materials to make yourselves a home? And one of the other things I want to say about these alternative materials is that they're very labor intensive and they require a great deal of dedication and hard work. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, that's what we used to do. We didn't have coin and paper currency 300 and 400 years ago and for 50,000 years before that. So it's a matter of going out and accessing materials. One of the other things I want to say about Anishinaabe or indigenous ways of looking at nature is that, yes, those materials are there to be had, but at the same time, we have this relationship with Mother Earth. And recent scientific studies have said that the Earth itself is a living, breathing, organic entity, which means she's alive. And all of the beings on there, the trees and the shrubs and the plants, the birds and the fish and the big animals and the insects and the reptile life, all of those beings are our relatives. We're connected to them that way. So when we want to use those materials, we need to do ceremony. In other words, we need to take our tobacco out or whatever offerings we want to make to Mother Earth. And we want to ask her permission and the permission of the materials to use them to build these homes. And someone said to me not long ago about taking materials from the earth, did you pay for those materials? And to pay for the materials is not to offer cash. It's to make the food offerings or the tobacco offerings and to request and use prayer and ask respectfully to use those materials. And so that's the difference between the way we do things and the way the industrial mechanized systems used to acquire materials. I think I want to stop there for a moment and see if Trinity or Colleen want to jump in and add to this.
Sorry, can you hear me? Misway, Colleen Carpenter, Jason Hassan, I'm out of Skip First Nation, an off-band member. How I wanted to jump in with this was to speak more on the personal journey and the lived experience of homelessness. It was And I'm very sorry for the nerves. I apologize for everyone. I am learning how to do this and speak from the heart and just share and encourage is what my main message is for many, many people out there. Um, so we were a family of 5 growing up, and we had experienced homelessness and running away from systems that could have taken us away and tear my family apart. And to survive all of that, I sometimes wonder how we did. Um, Grew up living in tents to eviction to prospector tents and living off the land. It brings me back every time I talk about this. It is a very, very special spot in my heart. And to face racism, to face judgment, authority figures with threats, and it was a long life. I felt like I've lived a long life, and I'm only 38, I think. And, yeah, I just wanted to share that it was a long journey for me to get to where I am today. Um, my parents, and I honor their names, Toby Matthews and Anastasia Carpenter, both late parents, survivors of residential school. They had done their best to raise us as loving, caring, generous kids, despite all we ever went through, and we have been through a lot. And which has given me that drive to be where I am today. And, you make sacrifices to big projects as well. It takes a lot out of you to do something. And this has not been an easy journey for me either, trying to do the work that I am doing today, which is I work for Keepers of the Circle, and I have been with them for about 5 years now. And I'm proud to be where I am today. I was someone that was only thought that I was capable of just cleaning. I used to work in motel rooms, and I thought that was all I was capable of. I've even faced education figures that told me that I couldn't get my grade 12. My IQ was so low. My English wasn't good, still isn't good. But I was told by so many people that I thought and looked up to would help me didn't. But meeting some women through the Keepers of the Circle has encouraged me to, get your grade 12, you got your education, you've got a lot to offer to this world. So I worked really hard, and I graduated and got my grade 12. Um, I It was hard. I worked at the same time, and here I am 5 years in with Keepers. So what I am doing right now is I am part of the low carbon construction team. So I'm a lead to a project right now. I'm currently in Bracebridge, leading a crew of trainees to build a supportive building that we're now building for Keepers of the Circle, this factory for building homes. And yeah, and along that journey though, and there are 2 very special people that I honor and love, and that has helped me brought confidence and courage to partake in these projects. Is George and Lillian Etier. Um, they were, well, they are elders that has given me land to allow myself to have a home to build on. And that were the words from George. George, I will never forget the words. He came to me and he says, no one should ever fight or be homeless. No one should ever not have a home. An Indigenous person should not beg or pay for land back. So those words were powerful from him. And with the support of his wife, Lillian, they were fully on board, and they could not wait to start this journey with me. It was a shocker though. I'm not gonna lie. I when they offered me this, I was wow, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to feel. Until I gave my answer. I remember George just saying, "Let's do this. Let's build your home." And this is where it kind of grew from there. Just building my off-grid home that I've built with 5 other Indigenous women from different communities. Because we were part of a project with Keepers of the Circle. We were trying to do something from scratch to now having this factory being built for this year. Like we're right now building this, the administration support building is what we're doing right now. And I have people that were completely green to this trade. Again, no one should tell you you should have a certificate of something when you already have the talent already. So these people that I have under my belt are building a supportive building right now. And I'm very proud to be part of this project. Again, and having something like this at this scale is a heavy burden as well. It's not easy. You face criticism, you face a lot of hardships. But I am just trying to bring to light that anything is possible. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of hurt, it takes a lot of tears. This wasn't me, waiting for a house. This wasn't me waiting. I just did it. I jumped in. I was brave to try and do this. And speaking today, with you all, I'm very grateful to be here and to contribute because having lived that experience of not ever having a home and being scared and running from authoritative figures, that needs to stop. It's the child welfare system, everything with housing, the lack of, like, that's what breaks those families. And I've been there and I want to be a part of this change where we can help. That is all I can say right now. I'm really trying to highlight everything and I feel like I'm all over the place. I just hope I could convey a good picture of what perseverance looks like and what, when people tell you you can't do something, you can do it. So Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. That was really beautiful for you to share pieces of your story. I know it's a very vulnerable thing too, to come online and share it to what you feel like is the world, pieces of you. And I think that's really powerful in us, not only as like Indigenous people, but also as an Indigenous woman. I think that's really powerful for you to come and be brave. And I thank you for that. So thank you for Marie for starting all of this. It's powerful, and thank you for opening this up in a good way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move forward into some questions that I'm going to ask to the panelists here. And we'll just kind of jump in. I'll ask questions and whoever wants to jump in is kind of the way I'll go about of how you feel if you build up off of each other. So just to start us out, let's start talking about what Alternative Build Project is. And then as you speak up, can you also just introduce yourself and maybe share what is your role within this project?
Yeah, I can start us off here. So hello, everyone. My name's Trinity Fletcher. I am the lead of research and community engagement at the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network, and I'm leading the project alongside Marie. And we're following different Indigenous protocols, and we're also taking into consideration Indigenous understandings of home and how it may differ from Western perspectives. So our project is centered around designing and building 5 culturally appropriate housing models using localized materials. So specifically, we're looking at timber frame, cordwood, stone, log, and straw bale. And the overarching goal is to promote self-determination within Indigenous communities. And what's really unique about this project is that it doesn't just focus on constructing homes, it's also about the process of it as a way to build capacity, particularly for Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people. And it's intended to provide them with an opportunity to take on different leadership roles in the housing sector. So we're really actively looking to engage these particular groups in all aspects of the housing development process, whether that's within the design, the construction, the maintenance. It really just encompasses all of the aspects. The project in particular has three main components. So first there's a literature review, there's consultations with community members, and then there's the designing the 5 housing models. So in the first phase through the literature review, we've been able to gather insights on the different, barriers, considerations, advantages, and disadvantages of using localized resources and housing. So the consultations really have been way more critical in the sense that it's allowed us to connect with communities directly. We get to hear their needs and we can then reflect those within the different designs. And we're also currently working towards implementing these designs while identifying the gaps and challenges that Indigenous women face in accessing these roles. And for me personally, being involved in this project has been incredibly inspiring. I've really learned just how powerful culturally grounded housing can be, not only in the sense of, meeting immediate shelter needs, but also in reconnecting people to land, to tradition, to community, to one another. And it's allowed me to shift my perspective on really what housing can represent, especially when it comes to like empowering people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed. And I think at the end of the day, what stands out the most is the resilience and also the strength within communities, and seeing that reflected in both the homes and also the people building and designing them. And it just has been such a powerful and inspirational reminder of the importance of, aspects of self-determination and agency.
Thank you for that. Sorry, we are working on trying to get Trinity's little name pop up. She's not on video, but she does have a little like emoji person on there. So I think they're working it on the back. Arlene, did you have anything? Do you want to introduce yourself and kind of share what your role was in this project?
Yes, thank you very much. Just listening to Marie and Colleen, they're so powerful. And, the experience working with them is powerful. And I am, as I said, I live in Denenay, and I came to the Northwest Territories as a homeless youth and lived in the shelter and couldn't survive it well because my behavior was something that the rigid housing environments couldn't manage me or any of the other people I knew. So I actually got to know community members and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women through, their being unhoused. And so I always try to position myself as a person, knowing that I'm a white settler, ancestor of a settler, and trying to really understand my place and my position. And I was guided by an elder who's no longer with us, and she really shared a lot about a lot of the wisdom that, I carry with me. And she is a person who would say, remember your position and your place. So I view my role in this project as something to make my non-Indigenous peers accountable for perpetuating a colonial and patriarchal system that robs Indigenous women in particular of the the sure knowledge that they came largely from matriarchal or egalitarian societies. And it actually was colonialism that persuaded both Indigenous men and women or gaslighted. My daughter taught me the term gaslight. It's gaslighting Indigenous men and women into thinking that they are not equal. And I kind of smile every time I think about it because I ran into a young Inuk woman that I met when she was just a little girl. And I said, oh, hi, I remember you from being a little girl. And she said, I remember you. She said, my mom said, you're so kind to her. And she said, I remember looking up at you as a little girl and just going like that. And she said, but now we don't need you. And I just thought, oh my God, like how true. These young, beautiful Indigenous women and girls and men are just taking the lead. So, in the years before, my advantage was I could read English. And I witnessed the genocide in the North of, those charity-minded housing providers and government who always thought they were doing the charitable thing and taking care of all of these Inuit, First Nations, and Métis communities, but they actually robbed them of the knowledge and the agency they had to determine their own future. So now I hope I'm not rambling, but I still find today that genocide continues today through, the being gaslighted into believing those are kind, charitable people that are helping all those poor Indigenous people that don't have any capacity to do anything. And it's just not true. And so I'm just kind of somebody from the government said, I said in some meeting, I said, I know I sound like a rabid dog, but like this is like where I sit with these different issues. And the government said, you are a rabid dog, like you are. It's not you sound like. And I said, it's because I saw the horror of the genocide. I see the horror of the genocide even today. And I go with people to court to kind of help them, navigate that horrible system. Anyway, so I'll just close it off. I'm sorry to take so long, but I have to leave. And I kind of don't want to leave everyone hanging about why I'm actually here. But I am here to as a background, kind of back person, supporting Colleen and Marie to ensure that my settler peers give space to the knowledge, the wisdom, and the leadership of Indigenous women. And so this is particularly important at this time because we're just going into hearings about housing rights violations in Canada that is largely carried out by housing providers and those nice charitable non-Indigenous housing providers that have not made room for Indigenous women and Indigenous men to speak their truth, to design their own housing environments, to design their own way of becoming housed in their homeland. So I'll just leave it at that, other than to say Marie and Colleen in particular and Trinity are leading the housing rights violations work to bring the voices of Indigenous women to the forefront in those hearing processes. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to Marie and Trinity and Colleen to understand how the hearings work and to really bring forward the solutions Indigenous community members have, like Marie and Colleen. And so I'll just leave it at that. And there's a toolkit, et cetera, et cetera. Housing rights violations is essential. I'll just leave it with one final thing, and that is we generally ended up, I ran a shelter for 30 years, you know, and at the end of the day, all of the people I hired who were credentialed kind of professionals, I was a peer. I didn't even go to university till I was 65, and then I finally went. But in these early years, all these credentialed people wanted to take care of all these Indigenous women, including cooking for them and caring for them. And we ended up having a woman who's really focused on rights. She said, you have a right to this and a right to that, and I have rights, and together we have rights. And so don't treat me like crap, and I won't treat you like crap, and we'll get along. And it literally, staff called it a miracle in the shift in mindset. So the shift in mindset is Indigenous women and men have agency. We just have to move over and let that come forward and shine. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you. If I can answer any questions before I go, I have to leave in probably 15 minutes. Just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And I think it's so important to have you sit on this panel and be that example for non-Indigenous communities of what does that look like. And it's creating that space, and it's being a voice maybe in places that we are not typically heard, and allowing us to kind of step up in a platform that maybe we're not given. And so thank you so much, Arlene, for the work and the empowerment that you bring coming alongside. And I think that's a huge example about what it truly looks like to come alongside us as Indigenous people, to support and to also provide your expertise and your experience, which are just as important as well. Marie, did you have any other additional comments you wanted to share, overarching, or should we move on to the next?
I did see someone with a hand up with a question. Maybe we can go to them.
Hi, my name is Connie Shingus, and I am in the capital city of Ontario, Ottawa. I have years of experience working in homelessness, and or not years of in shelters, women's shelters. And in my experience over the years, over a number of years, I have watched management who are molding their way into the Indigenous culture, that are non-Indigenous, and helping their friends out, and and getting paid really well for this, while there are people at the bottom, the clients are not getting the help they need. So I have made it my mission that I will speak up on this. And one is that is that I'm privy to some information that is where the executive director is getting paid like in the 100Ks, while people are not, that are on the street, and some of this money could be going towards that. I have experience of people that are, I have my own personal experience of watching management hire only white people and surround herself with white people to make herself comfortable, and getting paid well and not paying attention to the victims that are in the shelter. As somebody that has experienced violence against women, who lost a very successful career as a result of a stalker at a job, I certainly became aware of all of this stuff, and I'm a big advocate on this particular issue. So I wanted to address some of this stuff, in that how do we address some of this stuff that is going on, where people are nepotism, the lateral violence that people are experiencing while they're in the shelter from staff. Those are some of the things that I watched and experienced. I am a person that really thrives, like I really do consider myself to operate in a very with integrity and respect. And I also am a residential schools firm, but I've done my healing. I know I can call I can tell somebody that is a bully. I can tell somebody that's a narcissist with borderline personality disorder. I can tell when those things are happening instantly. That is and so when bringing it to management, this has now become a huge issue. And I actually got let go without cause but I was actually asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement because of the information I knew. All right. So now they have replaced 3 Indigenous people with 3 white people. And I've been looking for a job, a highly qualified individual that I am. I'm looking for a job, and I see this happening. So it's something that I'm very concerned about. And the fact is, there's the lack of cultural stuff that is going on in the in the housing is very very minimal in comparison to, and healing. There's no healing. Like, it's just so that's I just wanted to speak my share my voice and let others know this is a angst for me. I find it a frustration, and if there's something I can do to raise awareness or make facilitate some movement in this at this level, I will definitely be on board with that.
Thank you for sharing, Connie, and for sharing just like your truth and the realities of kind of sometimes it is that internal nepotism and challenges that we face. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the rest of these questions, and then at the end, we will save all the questions and answers for the very end, just to really portray the Alternative Builds project. So next question I want to ask is, we know like that even in what we've talked about so far, and even with Colleen sharing her stories, that within the homelessness prevention, it's so much more than just this physical living space. Especially as Indigenous people, it's connecting to the land, it's the cultural identity component. And looking at that, why is this project gendered component? So why is there a focus for Indigenous women and gender diverse peoples? And what is the cultural significance of this lens?
Hi, it's Marie. Maybe I'll jump in and kick the question off. I mean, kick off the answer to the question. Sorry. Oh my goodness. Sheesh. Yeah, very important question. And I want to say that when you look at some of the historical materials and photos from the 19th century and earlier, there's some very powerful photos of Indigenous women building wigwams, birch bark wigwams and elm bark wigwams. And it's interesting that it's the women that are putting these together. And then there's other photos of Plains people. I don't know if they're Blackfoot Cree or Sioux, who are packing the hides onto the travois, the harness attached to the horse, and they're preparing to move home from one place to another. And I believe, and some of the historical material bears this out, that some of our Indigenous nations were matriarchal or at least egalitarian. And in some of those societies, it was the women's responsibility to build the homes, to maintain the homes, and to move the homes. And so that suggests to me that Indigenous women at the time were very skilled, very capable, and very strong, as in physically strong. And so the homelessness prevention work of today and the focus on Indigenous women regaining agency, as Arlene referred to, speaks to once upon a time we had the skills and the tools and the capacity. And what happened? Why are Indigenous women now only just beginning to rediscover that we have tools and skills and capacity? And I think the more that we have programs like the 3 C's, cultural competence and confidence, where we expose Indigenous women, Two-Spirit and gender diverse people to today's trades, industries, whether it's welding or carpentry or electricity or plumbing or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, is the modern version of women using skills from historic times and reclaiming our place as builders, as maintainers of the homes, and if necessary, as moving the homes. And I also want to refer to the experience I had with, where the question came up. What did we used to do? In my own experience, I was evicted from the original family home in my original home community. And it was because of the people in that community did not fully understand that they have the right to grant land and property from one generation to another, which supersedes English common law. So in other words, what that means is that we have Indigenous allodial land title, original title, underlying title, meaning that the land is still ours. And that the implantation of the Indian Act and the insertion of reserves onto our homelands is a very recent legal development. And when you talk about how connected we are to our land and to our ancestors, all of our ancestors buried underground for 50,000 years, then that land speaks to us. We are part of that land, and so we own that land. Even though there's, skyscrapers in places and, concrete and asphalt expressways and fences and barriers and signs that say no trespassing, keep out, entry prohibited, etc., etc. What it really means is that in here and in our hearts, we still own the land. And what we need to do is sneak up dance and pick it back very quietly, like some places are doing right now. And I don't believe in that, fist-to-fist confrontation like what happened in Oka, Quebec some years ago. That was very damaging. But at the same time, it highlighted the strong differences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous and how much the Mohawks of that territory revered the burying place of their ancestors, which is why they fought so hard about it, And it's these kinds of matters and philosophies and ways of looking at the world that drive us now and that gave life to the Alternative Builds project. We have the capacity to learn to build our own homes again. And if the existing systems are not there to help us, well, then they're hindering us. And we need to find our way around that. On that note, I'll stop for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Arlene did have to leave now, so I just wanted, if you see that she's gone. Trinity, did you do have anything to add in regards to why the focus for Indigenous women?
Yeah, I actually think this is such a great question, and Marie and Colleen's stories and experiences really speaks to the importance of having a gendered lens within this project and why it's essential. And it demonstrates, Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, girls and gender diverse people face really unique challenges and vulnerabilities when it comes to housing and homelessness. And historically and even contemporarily, colonialism has disproportionately impacted Indigenous women. And that has spiraled into a legacy of displacement, violence, and systemic marginalization. And it really alludes to the need for housing solutions to address the specific needs of these groups, as their experiences with homelessness and housing precarity are often tied to different intersecting factors, such as, like domestic violence and poverty and the loss of cultural identity. And when we talk about culturally appropriate housing, we aren't just referring to a physical shelter, but we're also talking about, reclaiming a sense of safety, community, and belonging. And for Indigenous women and gender diverse people, these spaces must reflect the gendered roles and relationships that are embedded within various cultural practices. And by focusing specifically on localized materials and designs, we're supporting the establishment of, or reestablishment, I guess I should say, of the connection to land and place and tradition, and which can offer both practical and spiritual support for those who are impacted the most by homelessness and housing precarity. And on top of that, Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people often face higher rates of violence, particularly in housing contexts that are unsafe or not culturally aligned. So our Alternative Builds project, it really recognizes these specific harms and works towards creating spaces that offer protection and empowerment, also healing, and as a result, addressing the historical trauma that has contributed to the homelessness crisis amongst these populations.
That's incredible and so empowering. I feel like I want to go and build my house now. Colleen, did you want to jump in at all from your experience, your story?
Absolutely. No, again, it's hard to talk about things like this because you want to say it all. Sometimes you forget a lot of things, which is me. But like talking about homelessness too, I really wanted to reflect on spiritual homelessness as well. I remember being scared, and even if we did have an apartment for a night or a motel that we rented that could afford, our hearts and where we felt most safe was on the land, away from everybody. I remember, having to rely on some relatives who had vehicles, who were lucky enough to have vehicles to drive us out and get dropped off, and we'd go and live off the land. I remember that being the most safe place. And it didn't matter if we didn't have ammo or guns, or my father lived and hunted off the land. And when you talk about roles and women being powerful, I remember my father went out for a goose hunt on by himself, and she was left at home and in our tent and taking care of us girls. And then I remember this so well that she she heard geese coming, and she said, "Get the guns." The girl, and we were small, and we were like, "Which one?" So we all grabbed the guns and the bullets, and we ran to mom. She killed 3 geese above that river and went and got them. And my dad heard the gunshot, so he came running back. It just showed how powerful she was, because she was a strong woman as well, and she was one of my main inspirations to, you can do whatever you want. And I too, I go camping by myself. I go on solo trips where people ask, like, aren't you scared? I say, no, I'm more scared on a trail with men around, people. I'm more scared of that versus bears or wolves that everyone seems to be so afraid of. So yeah, just that spiritual homelessness is what I wanted to touch on. And the fact that when I did build this house, being part of that project, I wanted to live off the land. And part of the design where someone from the other land said, "Hey, well, this passive home, because it is like a pre-built, like it's a pre-insulated cabin that I have. Don't need much to heat it." But his lens was, let's not have the wood stove. But I said, I want the wood stove. I want it. Why? Because I can go harvest the wood. I want to teach and pass these skills to my daughter. Because I'm a single mom. I'm not relying on no man. So, and I'm doing it and I'm living it. And I've been living, for the first part of the project too. I had no power for 2 years and I was living out there. So it just showed my daughter, like, you can do anything. And that's what I want to portray. I am wanting to put together a video, a documentary, to show how I've been living. I've been out there splitting wood. I've been out there getting water. So there was that component to this house. There was a lens of someone else that said, "No, try, what about a pellet stove?" I said, "No, I want it this way." And I was glad I was granted to have it built this way because of my culture and the skills I want to pass on to my daughter. But yeah, that's I just wanted to touch on that because that is really important, that we women are strong, and yeah, English.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Kind of leads into my next question in the sense of like, why alternative builds? So what specific materials are used and why? And how is this different from how we may think about designing and building housing in a mainstream or colonial sense? And Colleen, you kind of touched on this a little bit too, just about like, no, this is what I want and why, but what are those materials used and why?
The materials are just the way these panels are built, it's almost like Legos. If you can visualize big blocks, that's what these panels are. So it's like a 2x6, and then within the same frame is a 2x4 on top. So you're looking at like a wall inside a wall, double insulated. Um, and what I love about these homes that are built this way, that are pre-insulated, every single panel of my cabin is pre-insulated. That is roof, floor, walls. Um, and what I like about not just conserving energy and being green is that these homes, you can move and ship. That's how it was to be brought to my place. We shipped it on a truck, and how versatile this home and transportation can be speaks and is way up there, because you can utilize those winter roads. You can package these homes up and go up north. We could potentially address the flood system. You put these homes on stilts, which I'm on. I sit about good 4 feet off the ground. And not only will these homes be protected, just depending where and what terrain you are in, that it could address a whole other issue. Let's say water, for instance, where we still don't have running clean water up north. We teach them rain harvesting, using the elements of Mother Nature and Creator. That's how we live together. That's how we live. We live with the land. And that's what I'm trying to kind of portray, is that we can do a lot with these homes. And with this factory, those are the same types of homes that we're going to be building with this factory that Keepers is building. And that is my goal. I told my boss, I said, put me on a truck and I will deliver these homes myself. That's where I am at. And that's where I want to contribute. And we can address a lot just with this style of home as well. It can adapt to anything. I don't have to worry about a washed out anything, because my road that I live on, in the spring, it's like a river. So this being on stilts, it protects the home, the insulation. Of course, of it being on, sitting above ground in air, you'd think the house would be cold, but the fact that it's insulated, it's protected. I don't have cold floors. So yeah, I hope that was a good question or answer, sorry.
Thank you. Marie or Trinity, do you have any input on just materials or anything in that aspect about the alternative builds?
Yeah, so our 5 housing models that we're looking at, again, that's timber frame, cordwood, stone, log, and straw bale. They each reflect a deep connection to the land, not only in their use of localized materials, but also the ways in which they honor cultural traditions and values. So from some of our engagement sessions with community members, quite a few have noted that they really like the look of the log homes, for example, because it just blends in really naturally to like forest areas, and it makes them feel more grounded. And with these materials, it's not to say that we're only looking at these 5 materials. We're also exploring other ones as well. Like we've looked at hempcrete, and we're also looking at like willow tree houses. But these 5 materials have been kind of our main focus since the beginning of the project. And what's truly special about these materials and these designs is that at the end of the day, they're grounded in self-determination. So they're not just homes, but they're homes that reflect the unique needs and preferences and traditions of the people who live in them. And in mainstream housing, there's often an assumption that homes need to conform to a set standard. And with materials imported at high cost and a reliance on systems that disconnect people from their land, this makes it a bit challenging. But in our project, we've kind of shifted away from this. And by using materials like timber and cordwood and stone that are readily available in the environment, we're kind of looking at reducing the financial and environmental costs that are associated with, importing materials. And it also brings the community closer to the building process, and also helps, reconnect people to the land in meaningful ways. And a great example of this is, Colleen's choice to have a wood stove instead of like an electric one, for example. So it's not just about the practicality of it, but also about, how she prefers to gather her own wood. And that embodies a self-reliant lifestyle that can be almost lost in modern housing or in urban environments. And this speaks to a broader idea in the project that the homes we're designing aren't meant to mirror kind of urban contemporary houses. They're meant to reflect the preferences and the cultural practices of communities. And the way that I see it is that each house kind of tells a story of resilience, a story of choice, a story of reconnections. And that's why they stand apart from, kind of Western ideas of what a house should look like. And for me, that's the most powerful part of this project. The homes that we're designing allow people to define their spaces in ways that align with their cultural identities and also, their personal needs and preferences. And it's not just about shelter, it's about reclaiming how we live on this land.
Yeah. Marie, did you have anything you want to add?
Yes. So the Alternative Builds project, as Trinity says, focuses on those 5 materials. But I wanted to make a reference to my own experience of putting together a tiny home. And when I was evicted from the original family home, I went looking for a place to live on the res. And I found it at an abandoned lumber mill site. And I asked the land around there if it's okay if I live there. And so the first thing I started with was a tent, and then moved up to 8 by 10 sleeping bunkie. And then after that, moved up again to an 8 by 14 garage, and had them attached together to make a 2-room tiny home. Friends and relatives helped me insulate it and have a little wood stove installed. And I had a very cozy little home in the bush. It felt so safe and secure and private. And those ideas lead me to question, when we're thinking about home, what do we need? Not what do we want. Do we really want 6 bedrooms and 3-car garage and a swimming pool? What do we need? We need clean air. We need space. We need quiet. We need a place to sleep. We need safety and security. We need a place to wash, a place to cook, a place to be with family. So if you answer those questions, what do we need? It'll give you a very different picture of the type of house you're going to end up building rather than what do you want. And so the third element was to add on an 8 by 8 room to my tiny home. And at this point, I had taken carpentry. So I used those skills to learn to build this thing. And I didn't have very much money at that point. So what I ended up doing was hauling across the field an abandoned billboard, which was about 10 by 14 feet long. And then I used driftwood from the lakeshore that had washed up on the shore and had dried and seasoned for many years. And then because I couldn't afford ceiling rafters, I used 6-inch in diameter birch logs and cut them to size and put them on top of the frame to form the ceiling. And then I found leftover galvanized tin roofing, and I did a patch of 5 or 6 pieces to cover the whole roof. So what I'm saying is alternative builds can include reused, repurposed, and recycled materials as long as they're safe to use and you're able to work with them and they add to the safety and security of your home. So I just wanted to add that as a way to think about alternative materials. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So what are some of the challenges that you faced up to this point?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges we've faced in this project, and something we've heard quite frequently from community members, is how to secure land that reflects, like the values and needs of the community. And I really won't touch up too much on this. I'll actually let Marie talk more about this, because we actually just did have our 5th annual Secure Indigenous Land Tenure Association conference. So I'll just put a pin in that and I'll let Marie talk about that in a bit. But another key challenge that we've encountered is, finding people who are interested in building these homes using these materials. As Colleen said, it's not about capability or skills, because the talent is there. And the interest from community members is definitely there as well. Many people are really eager to reconnect with traditional ways of building and living. However, like the practical barriers, especially around cost, have been significant. So building with like materials like timber, cordwood, stone, they seem more affordable on the surface since they are locally sourced, but the costs can be a bit higher when labor and specialized skills are needed. So that's why we're really pushing for, like community-driven builds. But of course, the costs can always be a concern. But what's helped us really overcome these barriers so far has been the strength and resilience of communities. The vision of the project really is rooted in self-determination, and that's pushed us to get through these obstacles. And we've relied heavily on partnerships, whether it's working with, community members who have built alternative housing, or collaborating with, different Indigenous architects who specialize in these building materials. So we found ways to kind of bring in the right expertise without compromising the core values of the project. It really has been a constant balancing act, and we've had to go back to the drawing board a few different times. But the commitment to ensuring that these homes reflect cultural identity and needs of the community has really pushed us and propelled us forward.
Yeah. Ari?
Yes, I think it's I think the interest is there, and it's a matter of finding like-minded folks that want to do this work. I think we need to focus on the message that it's physically demanding work. I won't sugarcoat it in any way. And at the same time, because it is physically demanding work, the feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment once you're able to finish whatever it is you're doing is just unbelievable. I would have fought off tooth and nail anyone who came to threaten my little 8x8 room. So don't underestimate the feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction you get from building something on your own. And also don't underestimate your own capacity to, dig and get your hands dirty and work with the saw, and, work with nails and hammer and, impact screwdriver and things like this, and squares and levels and so on and so on. It's doable, and it's a learning curve, but in the end, the things that you learn are so valuable, so valuable. And you can use those same skills in other places after you finish building whatever it is you're building, you know, and I highly recommend at least learning about it and experimenting with it, and then, you know, figuring out if this is for you. Like, it may not be for everybody. Like, you know, some folks don't want to go into the bush, and that's okay. But there are others who feel drawn to it, as I was, and as Colleen is, and to really connect with what it is you're doing. That's so important. So I guess those are the challenges. I won't say that it's easy, because it's not. It's physically demanding, requires a lot of planning and thinking and measuring, planning and thinking and remeasuring, because there are always mistakes, you know. But the things you learn from making those mistakes, oh my goodness, it's just unbelievable. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that for now, and thanks for your time.
Final question is what are the next steps for this? And or if there's anything else that you wanted to say that you feel like we've missed, you're like, this is also what I want to share, please do that as well. But what are the next steps going forward from the learnings and the cultural components, all of that as a whole?
So I'll just speak a little on what the next, we're like, again, building something like this at this capacity from scratch. We're still learning, and we're still trying to move with what we're trying to accomplish. So far so good. The tight timeline does not help. The pressure on everyone who is sitting behind the scenes as well, yeah, is a major factor too. But again, I'm here. I'm building. I'm trying to inspire. I am doing what I can at the best that I can. That's all I can answer for that right now. It's a work in progress, but I am very grateful to be part of those discussions and meetings. I appreciate that, as well as physically building this administrative support building for keepers. So yeah, I'll leave that at that.
Hi, it's Marie. Next steps. So once this project is finished, we need to move forward on another project where we do an actual physical build using one or more of the building materials that we talked about. And I can see that there needs to be a training program for Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse, and where the program encompasses all of the elements that are needed for putting together a home. So for example, the ground preparation, foundation, walls, roof, whatever heating system needs to be, ventilation system, water system, energy system. And I say systems because they could be electricity or they could be some other type of energy. And I say heating system, but because it could be wood and some other type. And so that training program would teach a group of people everything they need to know using that alternative material, what it is, whatever it is, and all of the pieces that they'll need to know in order to build a house from ground to rooftop. And then what needs to happen next is other people need to be trained. And so it needs to, what's the word, scale up, I guess, or to spread that knowledge out so that communities of people are teaching each other how to do these things and to avoid the perceived obstacles of the financial barriers and the regulation barriers and whatever other barriers there are. And I don't want to belittle the safety codes and regulations and bylaws. They're there for a purpose. But at the same time, we want to be able to see through those bylaws and codes and regulations to say, at what point do they become obstacles and not concerned about safety? And what I want to say about the builds that we're going to be doing is that safety will be top priority. And so we'll be aiming to build for safety plus, because those homes will be housing women and children and grandmothers and grandfathers. They need to be safe as well as culturally appropriate and responsive to the environment. So I just wanted to add that as a word to answer the question. Nigach.
Thank you. Actually, Marie, can we kind of come back to you too and talk about kind of what Trinity had brought up about like securing the land and kind of what that looks like or those challenges in that area?
Yes, thanks for reminding me about that. So I mentioned earlier that what I discovered about through my experience of homelessness is that we actually still hold a allodial title to our lands. And if the terms of the treaties are not enforced, then the lands over which the treaties were made, the terms of the treaties become null and void and the land is still ours. And I say that because treaties can only be made between sovereign nations. At the time they were made between Indians and the British Crown, Indians, and I say Indians because that's what was in the literature at the time, Indians were regarded as sovereign nations. Otherwise, they wouldn't have bothered making treaties. They knew they had to make treaties with us. And so a treaty is an agreement. It's internationally recognized and it's legally binding. And so if the terms of those treaties are not enforced, they become null and void. And the lands over which those treaties have been made are still Indian lands. The other one I want to talk about is very briefly, the lands on which the Hudson Bay Company was made was never bought and was never paid for, and there's no receipt for those lands. So all of those lands that made the Hudson Bay Company are still Indigenous lands, and they need to be, what's the word? Restored. And a way to start thinking about the land is what mechanisms that exist out there to restore our lands to us. One of the ways that some people are looking at is through land trusts. And another way that people are looking at it is to start to use ancestral lands again. And I know of several examples where a family's traditional trapping territory or a traditional hunting territory still belongs in the family. So when someone goes out and builds a home on that trapping territory or that hunting territory, they're exercising their ancestral land rights. And in those couple of examples, the MNR tried to go there and harass them and charge them, and it didn't work because, again, those lands belong to those people. It's ancestral. And so I think what we need to do about it is to do a sneak up dance and very, very quietly make sure that the land you're going to be building on is your ancestral trapping land or your hunting land or land that you used for generations and generations, and start to build on it very quietly, of course. And I also want to say that Indian Reserve land in Canada constitutes a mere 1/3 of 1% of the entire land mass that's Canada. Canada's land mass is 9,985,000 square kilometers of land from coast to coast to coast. It's the second largest landmass in the world. Only Russia is bigger. And so when you think about the size of the land, the amount of resources that it holds, the amount of resources that were taken out, how is it possible that even one person is homeless? You know, that's what scares me. How is that possible? Why can't someone go out and put up a tent, you know, and start from there? Anyway, I'll stop at that.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. You have so much knowledge. I appreciate it. I think it's wonderful to get teachings from you too. Trinity, is there anything that you wanted to add in the sense of kind of what's next in moving forward?
Yeah, so we are in the final phase of the project. I believe we're wrapping it up at the end of this year. And then by the new year, Marie and I are going to be busy trying to develop, you know, like a training or construction curriculum But as for the next couple months, we are going to be doing a few more engagement sessions. And at these sessions, we have workshops, we have presentations, we have discussions kind of on alternative building materials. And if you or anyone else is interested in being involved in those, we would definitely love to have you join. I believe there's going to be 3 more sessions. They're all going to be virtual, and we actually have a lot of people joining us from different regions in Canada. But yeah, so if anyone is interested, please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to kind of give you more information about what those engagement sessions entail. And maybe you could get a sneak peek into some of the designs that have been created for this project specifically.
And their information will be sent out as well for you to get in touch with them with the follow-up email, I believe, with the recording maybe. And so we are going to move into the question and answer. So if anybody has questions, put them in the chat and we can field them to the panelists. As we wait for some of those questions to come through, I have one last question for the panelists of like, how would you say this has impacted you personally? I know it comes from a lot of heart and in that. And so just on that personal level, what would you say has really made an impact on you personally? Anyone can jump in if you feel free to share.
I think for me personally, I never really thought that I would be focusing specifically on, the construction side of stuff and looking at, like the advantages and disadvantages of using particular building materials. So I think it's just really interesting, where life takes you, and being able to work alongside Marie and Colleen and Arlene, it's been really powerful. And I think it's just really shifted my perspective of what a home can be and what it can represent. And it's just been so empowering, and I'm wholeheartedly grateful for the opportunity, to work on this project and also be able to speak about it with, such excitement and passion. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see, where this leads us and the impact that it can have in, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years times.
Beautiful. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll just share that having met my elders who have given me this opportunity to build on land that they have given me, they were instrumental to this project as well. And like I said, I honor them. I think about them every day. I am grateful that they just had that vision for an Indigenous person and so welcoming, which has really inspired me to stay focused on housing and homelessness as a lived experience person. Yeah, I'm just hoping to create change, make change, inspire, and inspire those women and people who think they're not capable of something after being told they're not capable. I want to be that person that says you can conquer anything and be part of something really big and special, and everyone can contribute. So I'll leave with that. English.
Beautiful. Thank you. Marie.
Very interesting question. Never, ever, ever in a million years had I ever imagined being homeless. Because where I grew up, I always knew that that was my ancestral home and that it belonged in my family, in my clan, in my community. And so when I was thrown out of that home, it was devastating. And then after I built my tiny home and I was thrown off the res completely, that was even more devastating. And one of the things that happened ever since then was, you ever hear that expression, when you get lemons, make lemonade? Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm making lemonade. And the reason I say that is that I started digging and asking questions and doing research about, what is this about Indigenous land? What is this about Indian Reserve land? what are the rules? Why are the rules so convoluted and upside down and difficult to work with? And then it led me to thinking about how women are treated in this 2024. And it's still, what do you call it? Almost medieval, as regards Indian reserves. And I'm only saying that from my experience. I'm not saying that that happens with everybody. And so it led me to start working on, yes, we can, and we will, and we're going to build our own homes that are culturally connected, that respect the land, that, you know, help us house our families multi-generationally if needed, and single person if needed, or a nuclear family if needed. It depends on the person and the community and what they need. And so it always comes back to what do you need, not what you want. What we want is not the question. What we need is the question. And how do we respect our environment, our relatives out there in the world when we answer those questions? So anyway, it was the experience, my own experience of homelessness that led me to doing this work. And I also want to say that I could have gone out to the city to rent an apartment at the time I got evicted from my home and my community, but I thought, no, that's enough of that. I've lived in apartments in the cities forever and ever, and I wanted to be home, in my own home, on my own homeland. And where I am now, I am in my mother's homeland. I was accepted as a member of Wequem Home unceded territory. And when the band membership clerk gave me my new card, she said to me, "Welcome back home." That was so precious and so valuable. And so that's where I'm at now, is in my mother's homeland. But at the same time, I understand that other people are going through similar things, and I will do all I can to help them out. So, G-Rech.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, Q&A. So we have one question that's come through. I'll read it out. It says, my agency is embarking on a Housing First for Youth strategic plan. This will involve rooms for youth with no preconditions, just a right to housing. The young people will be diverse. However, what might be some key things to include for wellness and strength in a room?
There is a thing called biophilic design, BIOPHILIC, and it's the siting and situation of a home so as to respond to the environment and the directions. And so I think what you want to think about is, what are the teachings of the 4 directions? And actually, what are the teachings of the additional 3? So there's east, west, north, and south, and there's also up, and then there's down into the earth, and then there's also interior into the heart. And it's the teachings of those directions that you want to look at and incorporate into the creation of a room. And what's important for that person, I think, is safety, security, and privacy, that they have a door that they can close and that they can feel safe there. And at the same time, the door opens into community and acceptance and engaging with other people and being able to talk to them and join in whatever other activities there are. So I just wanted to add that something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll jump into something that comes to mind for me is asking them what reminds them of home. You know, is it natural elements? Is it art on the walls? Is it types of food? So I think it's hearing from them of what does home mean to them, because we know it's more than just that physical space. You have their room specifically to really diversify it. All right. I think those are the questions we have. And I want to say, like, personally, just a huge thank you to all of you. It's so inspiring and empowering and encouraging to hear about your journeys, but also like your learnings and experiences and the teachings. I think those are so important and valuable, especially us as Indigenous people. You know, we connect and relate through story, and you've really portrayed your work so well in that. And I think because it comes from your heart and it comes from that grounding of where you come from, and the importance of connecting and what that looks like. So I really am so encouraged by all of you, and I hope that this goes far, and that other people are encouraged and empowered, especially our Indigenous women, with that self-determination, to know that what others around might say and who we are isn't that we're so much more and have so much capacity and empowerment within us to, like you're saying, build our own homes. Like, that's incredible. That would have such pride, be able to say that, and to know that it was my hands that put that to work, and to be on traditional homeland as well. So I thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for that closing, Kim. And thank you so much to Marie and Trinity for everything that you shared. Colleen and Arlene have had to leave a little bit early, but I will extend a thank you to them as well. There are so many things about this project that are super inspiring in terms of the way that it empowers people, and just in terms of the way that it encourages us to think differently about what it means to be housed, what it means to be at home, what's possible, right? In terms of making that space for yourself. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to come, to the space today and share that all with us. I think that, as you'll see in the chat, a lot of our audience has been super moved and inspired by everything that has been shared today. So it is really impactful for you to share your stories with us on this platform. Thank you so much. I'm going to close this out a little bit with some housekeeping announcements before I hand over to Marie for ceremony. Thank you for everybody who's managed to stay engaged so far up to this point. I'm going to try and make this fun, but we'll wrap up shortly. So thanks so much if you joined us all the way until the end, or if you're watching this back until the end. It has been an incredible conversation, like I mentioned, that has moved so many. And I'd imagine that there are a lot of you that are curious about following up with our panelists. So if you had wanted to get connected with anybody who's joined us today, please do reach out via the contact information that I've put up on the screen, and we will get you connected accordingly. That is the first announcement that I had to do. The next thing that I wanted to put on your radar is just to remind you that we really do want to hear from you and hear your thoughts about the show, your experience, some things maybe you want to see more of, or, just generally what it's been so far. So before we head out today, I really encourage you to make use of the feedback form before heading out for the rest of your day. It really does shape how we go about developing future episodes. We do check it, we do pay attention. So whether you want to let us know to just keep doing what we're doing, or you have suggestions for topics or the format or anything, please do feel free to make use of it, and we'll implement your suggestions where possible. The next thing I wanted to bring is an exciting announcement. I saw somebody in the chat talking about CAEH, and I'm very excited to share that Prevention Matters is also going to be at CAEH this year. We're actually going to be having our first in-person panels at this year's National Conference on Ending Homelessness, which is really exciting because we haven't been able to do that up to this point so far. So this is going to be our first time replicating this process in a room, in person, surrounded by other people. And we are super looking forward to that, and we hope you are as well. You'll see on the screen here that I've put up the 2 sessions that we're going to be having these panels for. So if you will be attending at the conference, if you just put that information into the online program, you'll be able to find more information about those sessions, where they're happening, how to get connected, all of that. We will also have an activity set up at the COH's table or stall. We'll have something set up that is an activity based on what's happened in our episode so far and what's been shared. And people who are involved in the creation of the show will be at the table. So if you're around, please feel free to stop by and say hi. It'll be great to meet some of you in person where possible. The last announcement that I wanted to put on your radar before sending everybody on their way is regarding a really cool funding opportunity that I've been asked to share with you if your work is connected to rural and remote Ontario. So United Way Simcoe Muskoka is inviting applications for organizations to address rural and remote homelessness in Ontario for funding starting in 2025. There is a designated stream of funds that has been set aside specifically for Indigenous focused projects. So if you or anyone you know would be interested, please do visit their website to learn more. I'll be putting the website link in the chat just now, and if you're watching the recording back, this link will be somewhere either in the YouTube description or on the webpage. So if you or someone you know would benefit from this information at all, please do take a look and share it far and wide. Sorry, just having some trouble getting the link in the chat. There we go. Okay, feel free to take a look at your own leisure. So that's all I really had to share for today. Thanks again so much to everybody for joining us and for staying right until the end. We super appreciate it. As I send you on your way, I'd just like to wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're calling in from. And whether I see you at CAEH next week or a couple months down the line in another one of these sessions, I just look forward to seeing you at one of these conversations again really, really soon. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to Elder Marie, who is behind all of this work happening. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share your perspective with our audience. Thank you so much. Thank you to our other panelists. I will hand back to you to close us out now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Promise, for guiding us through all of this. And for those who are still here, Jimmy Gutch for hanging in right till the very end. So I wanted to make some closing remarks. Jimmy Gutch, another. For bringing us together today. And I want to refer to the 4 directions. Actually, there's 7. Spinning the kaya, Jimmy Gutch. So spinning is up, meaning all of the beings up in the cosmos. We thank you for guiding us and looking after us and keeping an eye on things for us. Jimmy Gutch. Kinoya spinning ayajik. And then we also refer to down, namei, which is underneath. Jimmy Gutch. Kinoya namei ayajik. We say thank you to those that are underground, the beings that are there. In their own way, they guide us too. And also to the beings in the 4 directions, Wabanam Nokea, which is east, where life begins and light begins in the day. Jaonam Nokea, which is the direction of energy and youth and activity. Epimishmuk Nokea, which is the west, where the sun sets and where human beings start to look down the road to their middle and senior age. And finally, Givenong Nokea, which is north, which is where the cold winds blow and the snows are, and where those elders of the White Eyebrow Society live. And so we wanted to acknowledge all of those directions for guiding us today and for bringing us together and for helping folks make notes and learn things and ask questions and share with each other. It's most appreciated. So if there's one word you want to take home today that will help you remember, that word is miigwech. And usually we say miigwech 4 times. It means thank you. So miigwech, 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 miigwech. And we also don't have a word for goodbye. We have a word, a phrase that says, we'll see you again another time. So that phrase sounds like this. Danapi kawagnamin, which means we'll see you later. So we'll see you again at the CAEH or somewhere else on Turtle Island as we meet each other somewhere. And again, thank you, Jimmy Gutch. It's been a really interesting and exciting afternoon of back and forth with questions and responses and discussion. Now,
Thank you so much, Marie. Take good care, everyone.